It's July 20th, 1969, a humid summer day in Florida's Cape Kennedy. At Launch Complex 39A, the Saturn V rocket, a 363-foot colossus, stands ready, its white and black exterior gleaming under the sun. Inside the Apollo 11 spacecraft, 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, strap into their seats, their heartbeats steady despite the 7.5 million pounds of thrust about to propel them toward the moon. At NASA's Mission Control in Houston, engineers like Gene Kranz monitor screens, their voices calm but tense. Across the world, 600 million people, nearly 1/5 of humanity, watch on grainy televisions, holding their breath. The United States is about to attempt the impossible, landing humans on the moon, a dream born of Cold War rivalry and human ambition. Welcome to Vestige Files, where we unearth the pivotal moments that shaped history. This is the story of Apollo 11, a tale of ingenuity, courage, and a giant leap that redefined what humanity could achieve. To understand this triumph, we must rewind to the 1950s, when the world was locked in a Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, superpowers forged in World War II's fire, competed for global dominance, not just in arms, but in ideology and technology. Space became their battleground. In 1957, the Soviets stunned the world by launching Sputnik, a beach ball-sized satellite that orbited Earth, beeping defiantly. The US, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, forming NASA in 1958. The space race was on, fueled by fear of Soviet superiority and the promise of scientific glory. In 1961, the Soviets struck again. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, orbiting Earth for 108 minutes. The US answered with Alan Shepard's suborbital flight, but the gap seemed insurmountable. Enter President John F. Kennedy, a young leader eager to prove American mettle. On May 25, 1961, before a joint session of Congress, he issued a bold challenge. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. It was a gamble. NASA had barely sent a man into space, and the technology to reach the moon didn't exist. The Apollo program, born of Kennedy's vision, became a national obsession, employing 400,000 people and costing $24 billion, over $150 billion in 2025 dollars. Scientists like Wernher von Braun, a former German rocket engineer, designed the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built. Engineers developed the lunar module, a spindly spacecraft dubbed Eagle, built to land on the moon's airless surface. The astronauts chosen for Apollo 11 were the best of NASA's elite. Neil Armstrong, 38, a former Navy pilot and test engineer, was the mission commander, known for his cool-headedness under pressure. Buzz Aldrin, 39, a West Point graduate with a doctorate in orbital mechanics, was the lunar module pilot, a math genius who'd walked in space on Gemini 12. Michael Collins, 38, the command module pilot, would orbit the moon alone, a witty diplomat-turned-astronaut. Together, they trained for years, mastering simulators, studying lunar maps, and practicing moonwalks in Earth's deserts. NASA's team, from engineers like Margaret Hamilton, who coded the Apollo guidance computer, to flight director Gene Kranz, worked tirelessly to ensure success. But the mission was fraught with risks. A single miscalculation could strand the crew or crash them into the moon. The Soviet Union loomed as a shadow rival. By 1969, they had orbited the moon with unmanned probes and launched a secret lunar program, the N-1 rocket, to beat the US. But their program was plagued by failures. 4 N-1 launches between 1969 and 1972 exploded or crashed. The US faced its own setbacks. The Apollo 1 fire in 1967 killed 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, exposing flaws in spacecraft design. By 1968, Apollo 8 orbited the moon, proving it was possible, and Apollo 10 tested the lunar module in lunar orbit. Apollo 11 was the culmination, but the stakes were astronomical. Failure would humiliate the US and embolden the Soviets. The stage was set for a mission that would test human ingenuity against the vastness of space. On July 16, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Apollo 11 launched from Cape Kennedy. The Saturn V's engines roared, shaking the ground as 36,000 gallons of fuel burned per minute. Spectators, including Vice President Spiro Agnew and 3,500 journalists, watched the rocket climb, trailing fire. In mission control, Gene Kranz's team monitored every system as the spacecraft reached orbit in 12 minutes. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, strapped into the command module, Columbia, felt the crush of 7 Gs, their bodies pressed into their seats. After orbiting Earth twice, they fired the Saturn V's third stage, sending them on a 238,000-mile journey to the moon. The 3-day trip was smooth but tense. Collins later wrote of the fragile chain of systems keeping them alive in the vacuum of space. On July 19th, Apollo 11 entered lunar orbit. Collins piloted Columbia, while Armstrong and Aldrin prepared the lunar module, Eagle, for descent. The moon's surface, pocked with craters and gray seas, filled their windows. On July 20th, at 1:47 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Eagle separated from Columbia, leaving Collins alone to orbit 60 miles above. Armstrong and Aldrin began their descent to the Sea of Tranquility, a flat lunar plain chosen for its smooth terrain. But the landing was anything but routine. At 100,000 feet, the guidance computer overloaded, flashing a 1202 alarm. Engineers like Jack Garman in Mission Control recognized it as a minor issue, an overloaded computer, but the crew had seconds to decide whether to abort. Armstrong, trusting NASA's ground team, pressed on. At 10,000 feet, Armstrong noticed the Eagle was overshooting its landing site, heading toward a boulder-strewn crater. He took manual control, flying the module like a helicopter, searching for a safe spot. Fuel was critical. Only 30 seconds remained when Aldrin called out, "Contact light," as probes on the Eagle's legs touched the surface. On July 20th, 1969, at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Armstrong radioed, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Mission Control erupted in cheers, but Kranz, ever focused, ordered silence to monitor the crew. The landing was a triumph, but the astronauts faced new dangers. A fuel leak could explode, and the lunar module's ascent engine, untested in space, had to work to get them off the moon. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Armstrong descended the Eagle's ladder, his boots touching the powdery lunar soil. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," he said, his words broadcast to a global audience. Aldrin joined him, describing the moon's magnificent desolation. They planted the American flag, collected 47.5 pounds of rocks, and set up experiments, including a seismometer and a laser reflector still used today. For 2 hours they explored, their movements awkward in 1/6 gravity. Collins, orbiting above, kept watch, alone in Columbia, knowing a failure below would leave him to return solo. The astronauts' every move was calculated. Any tear in their suits or a broken engine could strand them 240,000 miles from home. On July 21st, after 21 hours on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin fired the Eagle's ascent engine, lifting off to rejoin Collins in Columbia. The rendezvous, a delicate orbital dance, succeeded, and the crew transferred back, jettisoning Eagle to crash on the moon. On July 22nd, they began the journey home, firing Columbia's engine to escape lunar orbit. On July 24th, 1969, at 12:50 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Columbia splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, 900 miles southwest of Hawaii. The crew, retrieved by the USS Hornet, was quarantined for 21 days to ensure no lunar pathogens returned, a precaution later deemed unnecessary. President Richard Nixon greeted them, calling the mission the greatest week in the history of the world since the creation. The moon landing was a defining moment. The U.S. had beaten the Soviet Union, proving technological and ideological superiority. The global audience, from farmers in India to families in London, watched humanity's first steps on another world, a unifying moment amid Cold War tensions. NASA's achievement rested on countless contributions. Margaret Hamilton's software saved the landing, Von Braun's rocket made it possible, and thousands of engineers, from seamstresses sewing spacesuits to machinists crafting bolts, shared the victory. The mission cost no lives, but its risks were immense. Apollo 11's success built on the sacrifices of Apollo 1 and years of trial and error. The human impact was profound. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins became global icons, though Armstrong shunned fame, later saying, "I am and ever will be a White Sox, pocket protector, nerdy engineer." Aldrin struggled with depression but became an advocate for space exploration. Collins, the forgotten astronaut, wrote eloquently of his solitude in orbit. The mission inspired generations. Children like Elon Musk, born in 1971, cited Apollo as a spark for their dreams. In Houston, engineer Glenn Lunny, who guided the landing, recalled the pride of proving we could do something that big. Across the world, people like Wangari Maathai, a Kenyan student in 1969, saw Apollo as a call to push human limits. The legacy of Apollo 11 reshaped science and culture. The lunar rocks, studied for decades, revealed the moon's 4.5 billion year history, confirming it formed from Earth's debris. Technologies developed for Apollo, computers, fuel cells, lightweight materials, transformed industries. The mission spurred environmental awareness. Apollo 8's Earthrise photo had shown Earth's fragility, and Apollo 11 reinforced the need to protect it. Politically, it shifted the Cold War, pressuring the Soviets to pivot from lunar goals to space stations. 5 more Apollo missions landed on the moon, ending with Apollo 17 in 1972, but none matched 11's impact. NASA's budget shrank as Vietnam and domestic issues took priority, yet the dream of space endured. The moon landing was a testament to human potential, but it wasn't flawless. Critics noted its cost amid poverty and war, and some questioned the focus on beating the Soviets over pure science. Conspiracy theories emerged, falsely claiming the landing was staged, despite overwhelming evidence like lunar rocks and Soviet confirmation. The mission's success hinged on precision, courage, and luck. Armstrong's manual landing averted disaster, and the ascent engine worked perfectly. Was Apollo 11 the peak of human achievement, or a costly spectacle driven by rivalry? Could its spirit of exploration unite us again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey to the moon moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to Vestige Files, and ring the bell for more stories of history's turning points.